Thank you. It's actually, I think I'd like to bring back the discussion to some of the questions that have been raised in the last couple of days. There seems to be an emerging consensus on, the need for a systems approach for resilience building. And yet, a big question is behind that, how do we implement that? And I'd like to share some ideas that are emerging from lessons learned in the nutrition field that can be of relevance for all of us. Okay. The good news is there's convergence, a lot of convergence between the nutrition and the resilience agenda. Both require people-centered approach, a systemic approach that is multi-sectoral, multi-level, multi-stakeholder, a twin-track approach linking emergency and development. We need to be context-specific, looking in particular at livelihoods. We need very strong local, country, and regional ownership and political leadership. So clearly, these are two mutually reinforcing agendas. And in nutrition, these are not new issues. We've been challenged by them for over 30 years. So maybe there are some lessons or tools or approaches that have been developed for nutrition programming that can be of relevance for our debates on resilience today. What are the biggest challenges we've been facing? One of them is establishing a common language. You want to start a fight between an agronomist and a nutritionist? Ask them, is nutrition part of food security or food security part of nutrition? Yeah, so for agronomists, nutrition is the utilization box of the food security pillars. And for the nutritionist, food security is one of the underlying causes. It can last a very long time. Resilience. I think we are all getting towards a shared vision, and yet I've been interested to hear in the different sessions. If you're in a session where it's a lot of environmentalists in the room, it's very much about the resilience of the ecosystem. If you're more with humanitarians, it's about how we're going to deal with threats and shocks. If it's on nutrition, it's been a lot about ag-nutrition. So we are all still taking the resilience agenda from a slightly different lens, and I think this conference is a very important step towards going beyond those different lenses and bringing them together. Institutionally, our institutions are not structured to help us. There are silos within and across institutions between food security and nutrition, between emergency and development. Take coordination mechanisms. We have an entire coordination system set up for humanitarian purposes, the cluster system. Extremely important to the resilience debate. Not many around here today. And we also have in the same countries often government-led coordination systems on the same topics, and yet difficult relationships between them. We have limited skills for joint programming and action. We often favor recruitments on basic technical skills, but there's not much in the soft skills, organizational, facilitation that make working together easy. Finally, and this is something I felt in the debates here, there's this tension between we need a systems approach, and yet the question came yesterday, if you have one thing to tell the Minister of Finance to fund, what would that be? So the question, I think, or the opportunity rather, is that the fact that nutrition and resilience are so high on the political agenda today is maybe an opportunity for us to tackle these challenges, hopefully for a long time to come. I'd like to share with you some of the things we are trying to do to address these challenges. Starting with an example, it's really about building a common language and building capacity for joint planning. The method we use is very old. It's building problem trees and solution trees. We do that using nutrition as an entry point. And we've been able to start building capacity with this method thanks to funding from ECHO, and are finding a lot of interest. Basically, we put food security, education, health, nutrition experts in the same room, ask them which livelihood groups are the most vulnerable to malnutrition, and for each one, draw up a problem tree of malnutrition and then a solution tree. You don't even need to ask them if nutrition is part of food security or vice versa. And this is a tree from one of the workshops we held in Nairobi yesterday that was focused on the urban poor. What you see coming up in that tree is safety nets, feeding practices, food safety, family planning, sanitation, health services, agriculture, employment, infrastructure, education. Yeah, it's a systems approach. And it's actually been very easy to build because they've done that based on their own experience. You didn't have to show a fancy conceptual framework. You also have important issues such as gender and political will that come up. Now, if you want to take a bit of a caricatural approach, usually what we would call the emergency approaches tend to be very lower down, most on treatment and meeting immediate needs, and upper in the tree or more development. but now we're being asked to bridge all of that. So this tool that's been around for quite a while, maybe insufficiently used, is actually maybe something that could be very useful for resilience programming, coupled with other tools such as analysis of shocks and coping strategies and so on. So we've been working with this together with other UN agencies and NGOs, and we're really glad to see that a lot of practitioners are appreciating that. One question we're asked is, why don't you just use the conceptual framework of malnutrition that was designed by UNICEF in the 1990s? Well, the thing is, it's very different showing a framework on a slide and having professionals discuss the linkages, build that impact pathway, build the common narrative that will then allow them to work together during implementation. So ownership is key. Another area of opportunity are the coordination and delivery platforms that we're starting to try to establish. For example, in terms of coordination, Niger is a good example because there's a lot of emphasis on food nutrition security, a lot of emphasis on resilience, and a very strong political commitment at the highest level through the Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens initiative led by the President's office. And there's a lot of efforts going into aligning coordination mechanisms between nutrition, between food security, at central level, but also decentralized level. Work in progress, very difficult, but definitely worth pursuing. Regarding this issue of how do we implement a systems approach, or which intervention to prioritize, maybe the issue is about going from an intervention-based approach to one of building delivery platforms, strengthening existing delivery platforms that can carry multiple complementary interventions and achieve multiple outcomes. And if I were Minister of Finance, I'd actually really like to know that if I build up one strong platform, I would have multiple wins. And especially since a lot of the impact that we see comes from synergistic effects across sectors. We did a lot of work in Afghanistan with multi-sectoral planning on nutrition, and it was interesting to see how a woman who is literate is able to go to read the prescription the doctor has given her. She can count. She will pay the right price in the market, etc., etc. And so maybe the type of platforms we can look into are nutrition programs. In Cape Verde, there's a very exciting joint program that we're implementing together with UNICEF, WHO, and WFP, where the diversification of school meals with local agriculture not only has positive impacts for child nutrition, but is triggering a demand for diversifying the local production and helping farmers and traders generate income and employment along the value chain. Farmer field schools, that's where a lot of climate-smart agriculture is now being promoted. We're increasingly working to integrate nutrition promotion. Now, of course, the choice of platform can be context-specific. We may need to build them up sequentially because there's an issue of absorptive capacity. But maybe that is a potential way to go. Looking forward, there's a lot we can do to maximize, therefore, also we can ensure that resilience-building programs are designed to have maximum nutritional benefits. And in that regard, I won't go into the details because you have a brief in your folder about this topic, and I feel this is based on a longer paper. You can find these brochures and have a good read. But the other thing is, okay, how do we go from concepts to action? How do we build on what's there? There's been a whole generation of joint programs, especially in the UN. We've gone more and more for joint programming on food security and nutrition, but also on environmental issues. There's a lot of lessons learned in terms of how we've had to adjust our delivery, our planning, our delivery mechanisms. It still requires a lot of improvement, but that learning is something the resilience agenda can harness. This issue of delivery platforms invites us to focus on community empowerment. That's what we want to seek. And there's a lot of interesting case studies that show that with minimum knowledge, then the demand gets created. That requires, though, investing more in capacities. In capacities, both institutional and technical and delivery systems. There's been a lot of talk of mainstreaming nutrition in agriculture, when agriculture extension systems are practically inexistent. Can't mainstream much into much of anything. Same thing for health services. There's massive underinvestment in health services. The final point I'd like to make is how do we create incentives? Right now there's incentives to have a quick fix, show your results to the donor and the parliamentarian. Wow, I'm finished. in a very short amount of time. In the ag sector, all the markets are driving production more towards value chains and commodities, and yet we know for resilience and nutrition we need eco-based systems, food systems approaches. So how do we create those incentives to have sustainable change and scale? Thank you.